Homework 7, Combinations of Functions, Video 3. In the previous video, we talked about how to find the domain of a rational function, a function that had a denominator that we had to avoid letting equal to 0. The second type of function we're going to find the domain of is a radical function. Now specifically, we're going to talk about square root functions, but there are other types of radicals, cube roots, fourth roots, fifth roots, etc. But because of the time constraint in the situation that the world is currently in, we'll just focus on square roots. I went ahead and started the green box where I'm going to write how to do this, but let's talk about it for a second. Here's the function from the first video. And we had kind of already described that the domain, or rather the numbers that we can't put in here, are anything less than 2. Because if we put a number less than 2, then subtracting 2 from it would make it negative. Sometimes you can look at it and say, I think I know what the domain is, but I don't want you to have to guess. I want you to be able to do steps 1, 2, 3, and get your answer. So let's think about what it is we're trying to avoid and how we can make sure that we avoid that. We're trying to avoid taking the square root of a negative number, which means that we don't want this to be negative. Well, how can I force it to not be negative? By forcing it to be 0 or greater. So we can avoid x minus 2 being negative, in other words, less than 0, if we require x minus 2 to be greater than or equal to 0. As long as x minus 2 is greater than or equal to 0, we will not run into the situation of square rooting a negative number here, and so we're good. And we can do the same thing over here. Over here, we want to avoid 10 plus 2x being less than 0, so we can require that 10 plus 2x be greater than or equal to 0. And these two examples kind of illustrate how you find the domain of a square root function in general. If you have a radical function, and specifically I mean square root, the domain is the solution to radicand greater than or equal to 0. Radicand is the expression under the radical. Running out of room here. So in other words, you avoid having the radicand being negative by forcing it to be greater than or equal to 0. So you just solve radicand greater than or equal to 0 and you get your domain. So let's solve this one. We need to solve x minus 2 is greater than or equal to 0. That's pretty easy. Add 2 to both sides. X is greater than or equal to 2. Again, you're going to be asked for the interval solution. We could draw the number line, but imagine shading to the right of 2 with a bracket because it says or equal to. So the interval would be bracket 2 comma infinity. The other one's pretty much the same thing. There's just one small twist. I invite you to pause the video for a second to see if you can solve this inequality. Warning, well, you'll see. All right, let's solve this. If I want to solve 10 plus 2x is greater than or equal to 0, I would recommend subtracting 10 first. That gets you closer to isolating the x. 2x is greater than or equal to negative 10. And I take back what I said a minute ago about something's going to happen. I thought there was going to be a sign flipping here. That did not, because I'm not dividing by a negative. X is greater than or equal to negative 5. So this domain would be negative 5 comma infinity with a bracket on the negative 5. Well, I didn't set this one up the way I wanted to. I wanted to have a sign flip. So I'm going to improvise real quick and just make up a domain problem involving a square root where the sign is going to flip. Let's say that t of x is equal to the square root of 10 minus 2x, which is what I originally was going to use for the second example and for some reason changed my mind. If we want to find the domain of a square root function, just solve radicand greater than or equal to 0. In this problem, the radicand is 10 minus 2x. Subtract 10 from both sides, and we get negative 2x is greater than or equal to negative 10. But the last move, dividing both sides by negative 2, will cause the sign to flip. And so we get x is less than or equal to 5. If you were to draw this on a number line, you would shade to the left of 5, bracket on the 5 because of the or equal to part. And so your interval would be parentheses, negative infinity, comma 5, bracket. So finding the domain of a radical function is pretty straightforward, specifically a square root function. Just solve the radicand greater than or equal to 0 and you should be okay.